Good morning. Welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, May 23rd, 2025. Ron Quaranta here with my amazing co-host David Brill and our soon-to-be here co-host, the one, the only Joshua Ashley Klayman. Before we begin, thank you all for joining us. If you have questions for David or Josh or I, please put them in the chat. We'll answer them as quickly as we possibly can. Please also keep in mind nothing discussed is any type of legal or investment advice, and our opinions are our own, don't necessarily represent the opinions of our firms. David, the weeks go on. We're rapidly approaching summer, and the news cycle never gets boring. I'm waiting for a quiet night, and it's just not happening. David, let's kick it off. I'm going to say one word to you, and I'm not trying to make you angry. You and I text every day. Tariffs. What is happening, and why does the market react the way it does?
It's really uncertainty, Ron. Look, ultimately, we're going to get to a place where we have these new tariff agreements with our biggest trading partners. I've heard and read things, on the grapevine. Somebody said of interest was that that Trump was not happy that the Europeans discussed his conversation with Putin, and this was a way to sort of, show that displeasure. Look, there's a strategy here. It's going to play out. And I think we just have to get sort of comfortable with the idea that there are going to be these conversations and suggestions. And ultimately, let's see what deals, the Treasury Secretary gets us into or negotiates on behalf of the country. And then we can see the effect. But I do worry, from a markets and trading perspective, that it's something that, affects momentum, even if it's short term. And it's never helpful, to wake up to a big red candle and wonder why this happened.
David, thanks so much. Josh, welcome to the show. For everyone in the audience, I had promised to let Josh do the intros, and I didn't. So Josh, I'm sorry, but it's good to have you. It's been a little bit. We were talking about the markets and the word tariff, and every time David and I see the word tariff, our heads explode. David, you know what I miss is overnight I'll wake up and my phone will just have notification after notification. Crypto up 5, crypto up, whatever it may be. And I woke up this morning and I saw nothing. And I realized something's probably not right. Josh, it's great to have you on the show. Obviously, as a co-host, I want to talk to you a little bit about what you saw in the coming week. And are you sick and tired of David and I chatting about tariffs?
So not at all, but I will say, let's keep it all in perspective. As you guys were saying that, I just checked the Bitcoin price. Okay, it's at 109. It's actually a little over 109. So let's think about, yes, it's a big red line, but think of where this big red line is. So I will just be the voice of, I don't know what voice, and but the voice of saying come on, it's still at 109.
The fact that Josh moderates us back to normalcy, David, is one of the critical reasons we spend time together. Josh, David, I just want to dive into one other thing when we talk about the markets. And you're right, Josh. I mean, we started touching 111 and change, almost 112 on certain markets. But David, it's interesting. In the past week or so, when the three of us look at the markets, there almost seemed to be this divergence between what I'll call it broadly S&P 500, David, call it the broad equities markets, Russell 2000, whatever. But Bitcoin in particular held its own and kept going up on increasing volume. And I don't mean to overplay the topic, but one news blurb comes out about tariffs and everything falls out of the bed. And I don't understand why, David. Am I misunderstanding something?
No, I don't think you're misunderstanding something. But, look, traders react on news. Negative news, they'll react one way, positive news another. My sense is that we probably either later on today or over the weekend, even though holiday weekends have a little less liquidity, my sense is that we'll retrace to where we were Thursday afternoon. The one thing that is a little disappointing is that altcoins were starting to get some momentum yesterday.
Yeah.
And I think that momentum slowed down with this announcement because I noticed that it really seems like meme coins and Bitcoin are sort of trading together. But it's really first Bitcoin, and then the meme coin sort of gets some speed. later on in the Bitcoin run. And I was watching a few of them. Like last night, I was doing some work, and I was looking at a few of them, and they had like 10, 12% gains. So that money was kind of like itching to go over there a little bit, but I think the momentum got slowed down a little by what happened this morning.
David, is it coattails though for the bigger cryptos like Bitcoin, or I mean Ethereum touched what 2,700 at one point, certainly over 2,600. What's pulling the alts up? What's the engagement for altcoins that's driving price?
Well, look, historically, people who've made nice gains or who've done well with Bitcoin start moving some of their profits into altcoins. And so I think, again, there was some of that. And I don't mean institutions. I'm talking about retail folks. Sure. But I think some of that was happening. And then it sort of got the momentum slowed down by this news and this sell-off. And also, look, we have a holiday weekend, and although the weather is miserable in New York, and I'm happy I'm going back down south this afternoon, people do like to get an early jump on a long weekend and take advantage of that.
For everyone watching, when David's not at the beachfront compound in Florida and he's in New York and it's below 65 degrees, he says winter's back. Josh, David, let's also dive in. There's been other stuff as well. Josh, Klayman Family Office. Did you want to comment on some of the market stuff you've been seeing?
I mean, so this is actually a question, all right? Okay. Which is, I had a really interesting conversation with someone last night at one of the industry dinner things in New York, and we were talking about stable coins generally, right? US dollar-backed stable coins, other types of stable coins, and the person brought up, well, what is the outlook for the US dollar? Do we still think that in the future US dollar-backed stable coins will be dominant? Do we still think that the US dollar will be dominant? And the discussion sort of veered into this specter of stagflation, which of course has been in the news as a certain important voice in the banking industry also brought it up just the other day. I guess, guys, would you be able for the audience, if you would, to talk about that, your thoughts about that, and also just maybe explain what stagflation is?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, and I've seen the stagflation commentary a lot, Josh. So I'm going to say a couple of things that may or may not get me in trouble with some of my macroeconomic friends in the industry. I think the dollar as the reserve currency is here to stay for at least the next couple of generations plus, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Despite seeing the news of, I think it was Moody's downgrading U.S. sovereign debt to AA1 from AAA. I know everyone's heads exploded when they saw that, but the first downgrade happened in 2011. I think a second one happened in 2021. So this is par for the course with a nation that has $36 trillion in debt and $2 trillion a year deficits. That being said, no one's shown a possible alternative that would easily supplant it. The dollar and treasury notes make sense from the perspective of the markets, but David, this is a really good point. You and I should have this conversation. The treasury markets are telling us some of what Josh is alluding to, which is we're potentially looking at higher inflation. We're certainly potentially looking at challenges around interest rates and economic growth. And there's impacts to that. Financial instruments are denominated, as we all know, in dollars. How things are budgeted for the long term are denominated in dollars. The interest rate the U.S. government has to pay for Treasury now exceeds the entirety of the budget for the U.S. military, which is astounding because the U.S. military budget is bigger than the next 10 countries combined. So all of that means that interest on the government debt, it can be a long-term drag on the economy. And I think that's where Jamie Dimon has made some of these comments and some others. Stagflation is high interest rates, high inflation, which really handcuffs economic activity and handcuffs what the Federal Reserve can do, which is not cut interest rates in the face of high inflation. David, tell me where I missed something.
No, you didn't. I just think that stable coins in the U.S. will be backed by treasuries or U.S. dollars. So I think whatever the impact would be overseas maybe. But I think any kind of legislation we have here is going to guide to U.S. denominated currency. and treasuries. So I think we'll have some self-protectionist view here. I think, oh, go ahead, Josh.
No, I was going to say I'm happy to hear this because this was the position that I was taking, although not quite as informed as you guys. But what I'd been hearing was, actually, maybe the pound or the euro, given all the things that may be going on with China and sort of deals that could be happening that way, that maybe that'll be the next wave. And I was saying I think the dollar's the dollar.
The dollar's here to stay for quite a while. It just becomes a matter of how appealing is it comparatively to other things. And when we look at the EU or the pound, Josh, I think you made the point rightly. I don't see them becoming reserve currencies, but there are ongoing conversations about, the Chinese yuan, and China spends quite a bit of effort in the Middle East, in Africa, in South America now with, why don't you peg some of what you're doing local currency to the Chinese currency? So, this is a chess game that's going to go on for decades.
And I didn't mean to interrupt you, David. So
no, it's okay. Look, and also there's certain countries' currencies are alleged to be manipulated. So I think that would be problematic to have like global stable coins tied to those currencies, or at least for people in other countries. Yeah. The last thing is, we keep hearing different things about, definitely in New York when you hear that. But we do hear. What did you say?
I said you didn't even mention Gensler.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about commissioners and regulators before you got on, Josh, in the virtual green room, and a siren immediately went off in the background for David.
Yeah.
David, I'm sorry.
No. It's all good. It's all good. But ultimately, look, there's some rumors that maybe Japan's not buying as many bonds as they had been, or other countries aren't. I do think over time this is all going to get sorted. And so I do think that the dollar will, continue to be, have its role, but we have to do something about the debt. Like, we really cannot just keep spending and not doing something about the debt, especially if interest rates are going up. And, look, not being partisan, unfortunately, we missed a window when we were refinancing our debt to not do long-term debt. And doing short-term debt was really, really not helpful. And we're sort of feeling the effects of that now because we have to refinance a lot of our debt.
Yeah. David, Josh, if I could, just want to pile one more thing on this kind of conversation. One of the things that came out in the news this week, and I don't know how much of our friends in crypto world noticed it, but I think it was this week, David, the 20-year Treasury auction, which had so little interest that the bond markets broadly had to note that, look, interest rates are a concern. Government financing of debt is a concern. And David, are you alluding to the idea that, like, is just Washington not getting it? Like, almost no one showed up for the auction, and liquidity was almost non-existent.
No, I do think they get it. I think we have a really strong Treasury Secretary. I think that he's just been dealt a difficult hand. He walked into a poker game and he got dealt a very bad 2 hold cards, and he's really trying to play the hand as best as he can.
Yeah.
Well, not to get like too far afield but I guess it goes with it because it's minimizing debt, minimizing expenses, and it's also having to do with currency of some sort. I have to say my heart hurt a little bit about the death knell for the penny. Although I realize that, apparently it costs more than it's worth. It costs more to make. And also with the recognition that, it doesn't matter if we have pennies, if things are electronic, right? But it's still, there was some child in me was a little,
I'll share that with you. When I was a young kid, my uncle started me collecting, I haven't done it in 30 years, coins, and pennies and were one of them. And then I looked it up. Pennies cost over 3 cents. Each penny costs over 3 cents to make. A nickel costs 13.5 cents. So adios, penny.
So crazy.
I think one of the other things that's interesting to talk about, and I'm going to just say it, which one of you spoke to Jamie Dimon and convinced JP Morgan to have their customers be able to buy Bitcoin? I never thought I'd see the day.
look, ultimately, in some ways, this is really news that hasn't really gotten as much pull as it should have, because this is sort of traditional finance saying that this business is too profitable not to be a part of.
Right.
And so, their clients want it. And we've talked about clients going to online brokers that be able to have access to this. These are registered products. It's almost, 16, 18 months since they were, started trading, and it's time. So I'm glad he took that step. And I imagine the other banks will fall in line some point in the near future.
But David, Josh, do you think, I want to add to that because we've spoken about the wirehouses for 4 years now, and some of them, David, Morgan Stanley E-Trade, for example, and others have announced that they will allow clients to be able to buy crypto on their platforms, but they haven't done it yet. So do you, like, my hypothesis is that once they do that, we'll see really big legs up as retail and institution can get into it at that level. Josh, David, do you kind of agree with that, or is it like what's the other catalyst that would continue moving things forward?
Well, I think more legislation and more clarity here in the U.S.
Absolutely.
If we were to get a market structure bill, that could be really bullish for us if it enables, crypto assets to trade more freely and without restrictions, without additional restrictions. So I think those are really some catalysts. Look, but JP Morgan, like, he did say that they're not going to custody Bitcoin, that they'll allow customers to trade in it, but they won't be custodying it. So look, I think at this point, there's very little risk to having TradFi banks allow their customers to buy an ETF that has performed as it should, is managed by, we have several large ones managed by sophisticated sponsors. And so, this is what their customers want. And they're going to walk with their feet if they can't have access to it.
Yeah. Josh, speaking of, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and aside from the fact of what the bank's customers want, which obviously is very important, I think it's extremely notable. I know you guys are aware of this too, but just for those in the audience who also may be aware of it, actually, now that I say it, is just for Jamie Dimon himself, he was giving a different message for quite a long time. And so I think the fact of him coming out and saying this, the statement by the person is as big as the statement by the bank.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Ultimately, I don't think he personally feels differently about it. I just think that he's a pragmatist, and he's, decided this would be good for the enterprise. Remember, everyone who works at a bank are working for the shareholders. So ultimately, this is for the benefit of the shareholders that they offer these.
And products. If you look at his quote from the Investor Day, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something, right, Josh, you saw it was something along the lines of, I don't think people should buy tobacco. They have the right to. So same principle with Bitcoin. So it is interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how that that rollout happens. Josh, I think the other thing that was really important this week was, in the past few days, the Senate approved, move forward with the stablecoin bill moving forward, which I think is going for a final vote. I'm probably screwing this up, so anyone out there who knows better, let us know. Josh, David, you and I, the three of us have been involved for a long time. We provided commentary, full disclosure, on some of this. We've visited in DC. We're not lobbyists. I was kind of heartened to see some of this stuff move forward. Josh, am I wrong to be this optimistic about it?
I mean, I think well, first of all, I'm very thankful about this. We still have to go through processes like, of course, reconciliation of the Senate bill and the House, like those sorts of moves at a later point. But I would just say, there were some scary moments, I think, for the industry, whether it knew it or not, when it was looking like there would be when there was some opposition, right? Because I think for many, having legislation at all is a huge step forward. But I think for many others, the stablecoin bill was viewed kind of as low-hanging fruit, right? It's been in the works for a while. It was supposed to be a done deal. It was supposed to be, we have the votes. And I think had it gone differently than it has gone this week, that would have really cast some concern over all of the future policy initiatives and potential legislation, right? Because if you, I guess one could say, like, if one can't get the votes for what is, supposed to be non-controversial, then what can you do? So I think many of us were hoping and praying, and in fact, yes, it's fantastic news. So I think I'm very excited now.
Josh, I agree with you, and it's almost, for me, it was, if Washington can't get the low-hanging fruit accomplished, we're in trouble again. And apparently things are moving forward. Full disclosure, you mentioned the market structure bill, Josh, David. Obviously, for everyone in the WSBA, we will be submitting commentary, and I haven't read through all 212 pages of the draft, but Josh, we spoke about it a bit the other day. To the extent we can just kind of speak to it a little bit more for the audience, it really seems to give the CFTC much broader remit in the world of crypto, and there's a lot of work associated with that. Josh, was that your take as well?
Yes, that was my take. I mean, certainly having concepts like digital commodities and having a definition of digital commodities and those sorts of things, they are exactly what people have been hoping for and looking to do. I know, for example, I'll just say President Trump has given apparently some sort of deadline for crypto legislation of August. I don't know whether that's a firm deadline or a real deadline, or a target of some sort. But that's what I've been, what has been mentioned to me, whether true or otherwise. So I think, folks are very, very focused on this. I would just encourage those listening, if you do have feedback, I think, the Digital Asset Subcommittee team from the House Financial Services Committee is, looking, and others as well, are looking for feedback. And so I think it's really important that we as an industry weigh in on this, not just on what's in the text, but also as we think about implications for deals in that context. So some of what we'd been talking about just in a different context was, okay, so if you have post adoption of this type of market structure legislation, and you have, say, secured transactions, secured loans, things like that go bad, and you have someone trying to enforce, right, and perhaps liquidate collateral, things like that may involve digital commodities, for example, could the text allow you to somehow inadvertently become a dealer? Things like this, where I think we should very closely think about what exceptions we might need and whether we need them or not. That's just one example, but I just think it's something interesting to think about, because we've taken so long and so much effort. Well, I shouldn't say taken so long, but people have put in so much effort, both on the legislative side and in the industry, to try and come up with these broad concepts. And I think now that there's the potential that they may become law, we should really think about the follow-on effects and how to live with this legislation if it comes in form. But it's still a discussion draft, as you said.
It is still a discussion draft. For everyone in the audience, if you get the privilege of being on a conference call with Josh Klayman, she has this rare, powerful intellect that in the call, she will look at a document or look at what we're talking about and then ask the questions that no one else on the call will ask, which is, what happens if this, and then go down that road of if. And those are important considerations, Josh. So well said. David, I'm sure you've read the entirety of the 212 pages.
Of course, speed reading I do. It just makes things really quick to go through those, especially dense political, draft bills. I want to go back to the Genius Bill for a minute and just say that I'm going to assume that it was sort of political game playing and posturing, that the Democrats didn't want to allow the bill just to go forward right away, and they wanted to have an opportunity to state their objections, even though they will get to, in the cloture process. But I have to say that, midterms aren't that far away, and that I think if, the Democratic Party isn't going to work with the crypto industry people will have memories of this and will act accordingly. And we saw that in the election. And so my hope is that, the Democrats will, sign on to Genius and it will get voted into law. But it did concern me to see sort of the posturing that was going on. And look, I think a lot of it were red herrings, but I think that it's something we need to be mindful of, because I think, on this issue, there still is some concern, especially amongst, older senators and, the more senior Congress folks, that are they on board? Are we going to see them on board for these major votes? And so I think it's something that a lot of people are really watching closely.
David, I'm with you, and I don't want this to be a political conversation per se, but I think one of the concerns I have, and we talked about this earlier, is some folks in DC are throwing that word, the corruption word around and associating everything associated with some of these bills with positions and things that the president has done that they don't agree with. And we can have very different opinions about whether we agree or not agree. Optics of some of this stuff is terrible. I'm just going to say it, but that doesn't diminish the underlying work that's trying to be put forward. So, but Josh, to your point earlier, if you're a stakeholder in the crypto space, reach out to your folks in Congress and let them know the things that you're focused on and what is really important for the industry.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Sorry.
go for it.
I didn't. That was so weird. I was like waiting to say something, and then my mouth started saying it, even though I was like, "No, wait till Ron's done." Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Awkward. So I was like, one thing that came to mind just based on what was just said about the midterms and things like that. I think just even more broadly than that, as we think about federal politics versus state and what happens within states, I think it's really important to make the distinctions and think about, for various states, whether what you're seeing in Congress represents the message that you want for your state. Because I think as businesses, including those, who may be interested in expanding or changing location, as they start looking at states to say, is this a good landing spot for us? Is this a good landing spot for us? They're going to not necessarily know how to treat the message of the state saying, yes, crypto, come in, digital assets, come in, we're supportive, we want this, it's part of our economic development plan, if in fact certain of their elected representatives are seeming to go quite the other way. And people may say, well, local politics, state government is very different. I think sometimes the odds are just as important.
And that's really interesting. Shout out, Josh, to Michelle and to David Pope and Renato and to Joe Sicolo, who do the state stuff. There's so much happening at the state level. I think people sometimes disconnect. What are the folks in Washington, D.C. who represent those states focused on, and do they understand the implications of some of the things that are happening at the state level? It's a really important conversation and really well put, Josh. Thanks so much. For anyone in the audience, if you've got questions for Josh or David or I, please do let us know. I want to point out for the audience, we didn't record it, but for everyone who did watch it, thank you so much. The other day, David Brill brilliantly moderated an important session on crypto M&A. And I think, David, the next day, the news reported that either Coinbase or Ripple, or rather Coinbase and Ripple, are competing to buy Circle. There are really important conversations to happen there. David, did you want to talk about, and Josh as well, certainly your perspectives on crypto M&A, and is that going to be heating up?
Oh, I definitely think it's going to be heating up. And I want to digress there for 1 second. I think Josh made a really good point. And it's something we counsel our clients about thinking about the states and how hospitable they are going to be if you want to open a business in a particular state. And both in that state-federal dynamic is a very important thing to consider and something we discuss. Crypto M&A, yes, I think it's going to be moving forward. I think that a lot of the infrastructure players are going to be at play as traditional finance wants to have a bigger role in the M&A in the crypto ecosystem. I think companies that go public will be able to use their stock as currency to buy other companies. So I think there's a really bullish outcome, bullish projection for the rest of this year. and into 26. And I still believe, looking at my crystal ball, that I do think a major exchange, crypto exchange, will be bought by a traditional finance entity. So that's on my like 25, 26 list. That we'll see one of the big crypto exchanges get bought by traditional
Josh, do you
finance.
notice he never lets us look at that crystal ball at all? Like he predicted 110 the other day on Bitcoin, and it worked. Before Emma Channing yells at me, I did not wager on the 110,000 for Bitcoin, but I want to see the vault where this crystal ball, David, is locked up. But David, I'm with you and Josh. Josh, are you like, what's your perspective on the M&A stuff? And I'm not sure. I don't think you're directly involved in some of it, but certainly you're plugged into the kind of legal conversations there.
As funny as it may
Can you hear
sound,
me?
I actually, yeah, sorry about that. I was on mute for a second. As funny as it may sound, I actually do have interactions on M&A deals. I've had one recently that closed actually with a client that acquired an entity in Singapore just very recently. So yes, I'm very much a part of those sorts of things too. I mean, clients do what clients do, right? And so with client relationship comes lots of different kinds of matters. But I will say what's super interesting to me, I'm very bullish on the M&A prospects in the crypto space. But I would also say I think what we're also seeing is that some entities that may have considered IPOing, given some of the capital markets climate, that maybe they're pivoting, right? Maybe they will pivot. Maybe they won't. Certainly, we're seeing listings in the U.S. of entities that are well-known entities that we know that are listed outside the U.S. doing that in the U.S. But I do think that without going into any kind of specifics, some of the deals where people may say, okay, I'm going to sell versus I'm going to go public. If you're thinking from the perspective of investors, but also, just companies, what is an exit, right? What does an exit look like? Right. Is the exit to the IPO? Is the exit to a sale? And so I think we'll see a lot of thinking in that realm.
Josh, I should have known that. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply that you don't work on M&A. I work on a lot of different stuff.
Well, I'm not an M&A lawyer. I'm just saying that as when we have relationships with clients, that leads us where it leads us.
Let me ask a really dumb non-lawyer question. Is it easier or cheaper to IPO, or is it easier or cheaper to be acquired?
Well, Ron, I was about to say something, so you were reading my mind there for a minute, which is probably a little scary. But look, first of all, I think the IPO market is hospitable now. eToro was oversubscribed, and they've done well. Galaxy was able to uplist from a Canadian listing to NASDAQ. Kraken is looking to go public, or is in the process. It's being talked about a lot. One thing that people need to remember is, what do you want to accomplish? And a lot of companies that go public, they want to access capital. But being run as a public company, it's a lot of work. There are a lot of rules. There's a lot of infrastructure that you have to put into companies. Quarterly earnings, earnings estimates and things like that. Some companies really, it's not in their ethos to want to be public in that way. So they may want to have an exit, or they may want to have access to capital, but they don't necessarily want to be a public company. So I think that's something you should always think about as well, because a lot of times a really successful startup, it may take them a while to be in a position to go public from an infrastructure standpoint, a Sarbanes-Oxley standpoint, versus selling to a third party who has the capital, and then they don't have to worry about being a public company. Or if it is a public company, they can just fold them in. So there's other dynamics at play between just going IPO or holding an auction or selling yourself. But IPOs are expensive, for sure.
Josh?
I agree with what David said. I agree. I mean, I'm not saying that the outlook is not good. I'm just saying that we are likely to see a lot of companies and investors, making decisions. I will also say, depending on the type of M&A transaction, if you go public, right, you've got the company as it is, and it's public, right? If you have a sale of the company, there are different ways to structure it, right? There are ways where you can sell assets, right? And potentially not purchase certain liabilities, right? Ring fence that versus acquiring the whole entity. So I think it's really a case by case assessment. And I think, the numbers though are astonishing. If we look at what's been published, like publicized about potential targets for a certain stablecoin issuer, right? That was mentioned here. The estimates are over 5 billion, and that's on the heels of Coinbase acquiring derivatives platform Deribit for 2.9 billion. These are real numbers, and I don't. No matter which way it goes, it's very exciting.
Josh, go ahead, David.
Yeah. One other thing I was going to say is a lot of times companies will file S1s to go public, but at the same time be very open to a deal. A lot of times S1s, when they're filed, will sort of bring to market entities that are interested in buying that company. So it's also a way in that process to sort of suss it out and see who's really interested. So that's another way that you see, S1s used. And so you can go public, or it brings out potential buyers who end up buying the company.
David, Josh, I before we move off of this topic, 2 last points. I want to do justice, David, for the panel that you so expertly moderated. Shout out to David Adlerstein and Molly Abraham and Elliot Chun, real industry experts who deeply understand the ecosystem. If you're interested in learning more about those folks, info@wsba.co. David, Josh, I do want to rip up the script on the kind of M&A conversation for one moment. When you look at the analysis, and we mentioned the case, we have no vested interest in any of the firms involved, but Coinbase and Ripple competing for Circle, which is one of the OG kind of stablecoin issuers and a pretty profitable business. Stablecoins in general are really generally very profitable business. And David, we'll have to have the yield sharing conversation at some point. But are you worried about this idea that I've been reading about concentration risk? When you look at one of those potential acquirers is pretty deeply ingrained with the stablecoin issuer. Are you concerned over time as these M&A transactions move forward? Are we looking at a potential concentration risk?
It is a potential issue. With Circle, I'm not as concerned. It's the Circle, I don't want to call it a saga, but what's going on is really fascinating because, Ripple had just come out and unveiled their own stable coin. So, what does this mean for that stable coin? And also, as many people know, Circle has a commercial relationship with Coinbase. So, if Ripple were to buy Circle, does that relationship go away, or does Ripple and Coinbase become partners? So there's a lot of interesting dynamics that are going on, and sort of for people who are interested in deals broadly, I think it's interesting to read up on this because of these potential interrelationships. My last point is that look, Coinbase is a public company. They have a lot of stock. They can use their stock in transactions and use that as currency. So I think you'll see other companies that went public do that too.
Josh, agreed?
Agreed. I think also just if we think about the companies in general who are bidding, right? I mean, with Ripple being able to free up all of the energy that it spent on this long time SEC litigation, I mean, in addition to the stable coin that, as David noted, it is launched, the RLUSD, right? I just think, well, holding all that discussion aside, I think we should just remember also even folks that back in the day took in money in ICOs or other sorts of transactions or sales transactions, to the extent that they were paid in digital assets like Bitcoin or ETH, to the extent that the market moves upwards, just the purchasing power becomes that much more. And so I think as the price of Bitcoin, not investment advice, merely an observation, as it rises, that will have an impact on choices that people make, because it's not just the investors, it's also the companies that have in their treasury certain types of digital assets.
Josh, David, well said. Last point on this that I want to raise as well. When we look at that landscape and we talk about these mergers and acquisitions, I mentioned concentration risk a bit earlier. So does this mean the United States, David, needs more exchanges, needs more infrastructure providers, needs more custodians in this space, needs more valuation firms? Do you see that as kind of a strategy or a roadmap for the U.S. going forward?
Look, I think we absolutely need more custodians, and that's not a knock in any way on the existing custodians, which I think are good, but we do need more custodians for sure. Look, I do think as the industry grows, you're going to need more players, and so it's good to have new entrants come in, as well as older entrants continuing to up their game on their product offerings and just making things easier. Look, UI is still an issue in this space, so there's definitely room for different companies to come in and improve what we have. And so yeah, look, I think we have to continually iterate, and different people come up with different ideas and they can take them to market. And look, we have really good crypto exchanges. Maybe there's an exchange that can do it better that we haven't seen or haven't contemplated. So I think continuing to iterate with the technology is important. And yes, we need more, and especially custodians.
Josh, to the extent you can speak about it, are you, alluding to my earlier point, are you seeing new types of firms in the crypto space pop up, into the marketplace?
I am. And I'm also seeing a great appetite by some players that have been exclusively outside of the US.
Come in. Yeah.
And this is really where I think the types of things that I was mentioning about, like, what is your elected representative saying?
Yeah.
And how does that reflect on your state? That it really comes up because a lot of entities are really trying to figure out their next moves and where those next moves should be made from. And no matter how much a state may seem to be rolling out the red carpet or saying, like, we see this as a future area of growth, you have to realize that people see what's in the news. And whether it's political theater or whether it is true. I mean, I just think states should be a bit, I'm sure they are cognizant of this, but maybe they should really think about this.
David, Josh just handed me the easiest softball because she's alluding to our onshoring deep dive that we'll be doing with the legal working group in the coming weeks. And Josh, you're absolutely right. It's an important topic. My friends, we are approaching time. I just want to ask, I was not invited to the crypto dinner outside of DC on Thursday last evening. I'm assuming both of you were or not, but I'm just curious about your take on it.
All I'll say is that I believe in the free markets, and that if token holders and if they want to have this arrangement, and I believe in the free markets. That's going to be my take.
Josh?
Yeah, I'm not sure what comments I should make. I believe in the free markets too. I agree with David. I will say, I think some things remain to be seen, right? Like, I say this because on one hand, obviously, I don't think it's unusual, although I'm not really, maybe it is unusual and I just don't know. But I mean, donors meet with people that they contributed to all the time. Like, it's not a bad thing. I think the part where, one should just look, and I assume that this will not be the case, but, if people are if decisions are starting to be made that then look like maybe completely irrational is the wrong word, but like, anyway, let me just stop that. I'm just saying, to the extent, for example, hypothetically, if I had, this is having nothing to do with the dinner. Let me put that aside for a moment entirely. Different thing. I think, for example, if I were, a huge donor to David, and I'm in some industry, I create swimming pools, right? I don't know. Just imagine something having nothing to do with our crypto space. And I meet with David because I've contributed and helped his campaign because I really believe in what he's doing. That's one thing. Like, I think that's totally good. If, however, I'm doing really horrible things, and I'm committing fraud left and right, hypothetically, in the pool industry, and somehow something gets changed in my favor that people may be like, why is that no longer, why is that crazy pool company woman no longer, I don't know. I digress. I think you guys know where I'm going with that, but I would just say, like, this happens all the time. And I feel like calling out that it's crypto is unfair to crypto.
I agree with you, Josh, and
Yes.
I believe in the free market as well. Sometimes optics aren't great, but we shouldn't read too much into that. David, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, not at all. I think it's really important to not let it get conflated between what is going on and the legislation that's before Congress. If anything, having legislation will further codify how participants work in the stablecoin space. So this whole argument really is narrow. I don't want to use the words that I think about it, honestly. It's just having legislation will prevent, conceived ideas that there are issues with stable coins in the industry. And so I think it's really a red herring for the Democrats. And it's really disappointing to me at this stage that this has, come up in terms of this legislation, because it's really like an opposite argument. And so I don't know why. I mean, we know why politics are played and so on, but it really undercuts what's actually going on here. And so it's just, again,
actually, may I just jump in on that for 1 second?
Go for it.
That's an excellent point, because again, we're seeing in the backdrop the stablecoin legislation and all the moves, right, that are happening that have now been very positive after some scary times. Yeah. And to juxtapose that with someone making bringing up the dinner and things like that, and making it seem like these are related, that seems to cut against the reality, which is the reality is that this was low-hanging fruit. It has nothing to do with, it has.
Josh, David, I realized that I was literally totally joking about raising the dinner, and you both took it and made logical points, and I didn't. But anyway, I'm grateful to you both. We are, David, Josh, we are at time. We've got a long weekend coming up. David, the Gulf Jet's flying you down to Florida later on today. Josh, I'm sure you've got plans as well. What are you both planning for the long weekend?
I'm going to be very happy to be back in Florida and away from the winter weather we're having here in New York. Really a lot of reading. There's there's so much going on. We didn't even get a chance to talk about, there was a fraud case brought against Unicoin by the SEC. There's a patent infringement case brought against Uniswap by Bancor. There's all these things going on. So I think plenty of reading. I will definitely be watching the NBA playoffs with Ernest. And, you can't have Memorial Day without a barbecue. So I'll certainly be at a barbecue.
Josh? What's going on in Klayman Manor?
I am going to be trying to relax. Even though the weather's not expected to be so great, I am planning to go to the beach. Maybe not on the beach, but towards the beach, and just trying to enjoy. Next week, I will be going to Las Vegas for some meetings around Bitcoin Las Vegas. So yeah, I feel like this weekend, I'm sure I'll get work done and catch up on reading and stuff, but I think just not traveling, except to try and be in a more scenic locale, would be nice. What about you, Ron? What are you doing?
I have the remainder of a market structure draft to review, and a dear friend advised me that it's probably best to do it over a good Chianti. So I'll be doing that over the weekend, and I did promise my wife a quiet dinner without me looking at market prices, David. So I think you and Josh will appreciate that. We'll leave it there. David, Josh, thank you both so much for everyone who attended and joined us. Go ahead, Josh.
I just wanted to say, because, you said that very nice thing about me looking at, bills and having ideas. I just wanted to plug for Renato. Mariotti, is that how I say his
Mariotti,
last name?
attorney at WSBA, member for Paul Hastings.
Yes, and I was very impressed when we were talking about the market structure bill at how deeply he'd been probing into it. So
Yeah.
just wanted to plug someone else. So that's
and
all.
he read it entirely at least once. How much caffeine do you have to read draft legislation? No, Josh, it's a good plug. I appreciate it. David, Josh, thank you both so much. For everyone who's in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. If you have additional questions for Josh or I or David, info@wsba.co. Everyone, have a great Memorial Day weekend stateside. David, Josh, we'll be back next week. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Good holiday, everybody.